So I came across this video. It's Paul Jackson, one of the greatest guitarists ever. Oh my God, Paul Jackson is so good. Paul Jackson Jr. is so good. And he was on the Vertex FX channel. Really good channel. The guy interviews a lot of artists. Really, go check it out one day. So he was interviewing about playing on Lady in My Life because Paul Jackson Jr. would play with Michael Jackson throughout on Bad and Thriller. It's great partnership. So he's playing Lady in My Life, and he was saying like, well, initially the whole the melody comes from Rod Temperton. Rod Temperton wrote the song, and Paul Jackson Jr. said, well, I added a little bit of stuff later, but the main melody that you would hear, LL Cool J sampled it for Hey Lover, with Boyz II Men. So that guitar lick, but it was in Rod Temperton's head. Shout out to Rod Temperton. Rest in peace to Rod Temperton. Rod Temperton is one of the greatest songwriters ever. Like he came from the group Heatwave. He wrote Always and Forever. Ain't No Half Steppin' that was even made more famous by Big Daddy Kane later on. Groove Line. He would later write You Put a Move on Me for Tamia. He wrote Baby Come to Me for Patti Austin and James Ingram. He would write Thriller. He would write Lady in My Life. Just go look up Rod Temperton's discography as a songwriter. You would be amazed. Because it was interesting, like a few weeks ago on X, this dude, young guy probably, he said R. Kelly was the greatest American songwriter ever. And listen, I love Kells. I always separate the music from the horrible acts. So yes, Kells is in prison, but let's not pretend that people didn't love R. Kelly. I hate when people say, "Oh, I never loved them." Lies. Everybody loved R. Kelly. So, but yes, he wrote, "You Remind Me of My Jeep," but he also wrote "I Believe I Can Fly," and he also wrote that whole Chapter in the Closet thing that people did love. Because listen, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that people wasn't like in tune when that thing first started. Once we got to chapter 58, it was horrible. But the first 6 or 7 chapters, like, oh my God, what's next? So yeah, let's not pretend R. Kelly was not great. He was. But he's not the greatest American songwriter of all time. There's too many songwriters that's great, right? But people say, what about Babyface and what about Stevie Wonder? And you could throw Rod Temperton in there, man. Rod Temperton was fantastic. So when you start thinking about Lady in My Life, it wasn't released. Thriller had 9 songs. And if you haven't watched the documentary Thriller 40, it came out a couple of years ago. It's fantastic. Oh, it's fantastic. I love that documentary. But it was 9 songs, only 9 songs off that album. SZA just put out an album, it had like 32 tracks. It's like, you don't need that many songs. I know it was like there's 15, I think it was like a remix album or something. It was like 15 new tracks, but still, you don't need all those songs. But Thriller was only 9 tracks and only 7 was released. And all 7 hit the top 10. And the only songs that wasn't released was Baby Be Mine, which I think Rod Temperton wrote. Fantastic R&B song. Oh, should have been released. And especially Lady in My Life. Lady in My Life, it's so good. It's funny because Eddie Murphy had that joke about off the wall. Michael Jackson had that She's Out of My Life. And, that's what made, you heard, she's out of my life. But Lady in My Life was like the adult version of that. So I guess the way the story goes, Michael Jackson allegedly said that was the hardest song for him to sing. And you got songs like Human Nature and all these other tracks and Billie Jean and Beat It and Want to Be Starting Something. Like you would think like, oh, the hardest song might have been one of those songs, right? He said the hardest song was Lady in My Life because they did take after take after take. And I think Michael wasn't giving Quincy Jones what he wanted. And he said they stopped and Quincy talked to him and Quincy Jones said, hey, man, I want you to beg because that song is a begging song. Like he's pleading to this woman. And Michael went back in the studio and this week, I want you, I want you, I want you, I want you, baby. Cause I need you, girl. Oh, stay with me. Don't you go nowhere. Man, Mike was pleading his heart out. And I might have to say, of all those songs on Thriller and all those songs that were released, the best vocal performance might have been Lady in My Life. It might be his best vocal performance overall. And that's a lot to say because he sang a lot of great songs. But Lady in My Life was fantastic and they never released it. And I think part of the reason was when Off the Wall came out, Off the Wall was probably the best album that year. But when the Grammys came around, they stuck it in the R&B categories and he was ticked. And he said, that's never going to happen again. I'm going to make the greatest album ever. And they made another album. There's that song Starlight and all these other tracks that was really good. But he scrapped that. He's like, nope, to R&B. I was like, I want to make the greatest pop record ever. And this is where we get Thriller. And I started thinking, like, the one thing that we always seem to miss, because Michael Jackson, he wears the Mickey Mouse t-shirt, he has the loafers, he's slender, he has the high voice. You don't really realize how tough a businessman he was. Michael Jackson was tough. And that comes from his dad, Joseph, and it's almost his surrogate dad, Berry Gordy. It's almost like a Bronx Tale, where that character in the Bronx Tale, it was his dad and it was the mob boss. It's the same thing. Like, Coleman Domingo is in Oscar season, and asking about the Michael Jackson biopic, and he's playing Joe Jackson. And I hope they don't have him playing Joe Jackson like Danny Glover in The Color Purple, where Joe Jackson's going to be this villainous character. Yes, Joe did some bad stuff, and Michael's talked about that. But Joseph also loved his family. He got them out of Gary, Indiana. Like, when he found out his kids actually had music ability, he had them playing in bars when they were young. Maybe a little bit too much, but he had them playing in bars. But by the time they got to Motown, they were seasoned professionals, man. That's why when you see all those little Michael Jackson clips, he was already a seasoned vet. And then when he felt like Motown wasn't treating his sons right when they got older, he got them out of that contract, except for Jermaine, because he married to Berry Gordy's daughter. He got them out of that contract and took them to CBS Records. I don't know if we would have got off the wall in Thriller if Joseph didn't get Michael and his brothers out of that Motown deal. Now, Joseph didn't think Michael should have done a solo album. He thought that Michael should have stayed with his brothers. But But Michael saw how tough Joe was, and he saw how tough Berry Gordy was. He saw these two men being tough on opposite sides of the business. And even from watching Stevie Wonder and Marvin Gaye, like, they were tough representing themselves as artists. So you're Michael Jackson. You're observing Stevie Wonder. You're observing Marvin Gaye and fighting for their rights as artists. You're observing Berry Gordy as a businessman. You're observing your father, who wasn't in the music industry, but he was a tough negotiator as well, and wouldn't take anything. You take all these things, and by the time we get to Michael Jackson, after Off the Wall being snubbed for Album of the Year at the Grammys, he's saying, I'm going to make the best pop record ever, because he was around all these strong dudes that paved the way for him. We don't talk about how tough Michael Jackson is. Who else? There's nobody today, I don't think, would take all their money off their best album and buy the Beatles catalog. And it wasn't just the Beatles catalog. It's a whole catalog that had the Beatles, Sly Stone, which Michael did give Sly Stone back his publishing. About this catalog of music that had but the bulk of it was the Beatles catalog. Who would do that today? Would Taylor Swift do that today? Would Beyonce do that today? Take all the money they earned and it was a risk. I mean, Paul McCartney said he made a lot of money off publishing, but publishing wasn't a big thing. It wasn't, not too many people owned publishing back then. It was Paul McCartney and a few other people. I think Paul McCartney's father-in-law is the one who told him about it. But people weren't making a lot of money off publishing. It was a risk. But he took that risk with his own money. Who would do that today? I don't think people aren't as tough as Michael Jackson or even Prince, who's willing to sacrifice themselves for business. Maybe that's why they're not around anymore. But I digress. So when it comes to Michael Jackson, what do you think is his best vocal performance? It's funny when you start thinking about when Quincy pulled him aside and said, I want you to beg. It's almost like in my head, Quincy was saying, like, hey, man, I don't want this Mickey Mouse wearing, Jerry Curl wearing, loafer wearing Michael Jackson. I want that little Michael Jackson who's saying, who's loving you? Singing about love he didn't even experience yet. I want that little Michael Jackson, not this Mickey Mouse Michael Jackson. You got me? Okay. Cause I need you, girl. Oh, stay with me. I want you, baby. Oh my God. What do you think was Michael Jackson's best vocal performance? Was it Lady in My Life? Was it when he was little Michael Jackson? Was it something else? Let me know. Rest in peace, Quincy Jones. Rest in peace, Rod Temperton. Rest in peace, Michael Joseph Jackson. We miss you.